5 years ago, the royal mating hall had been filled with gold, white roses, and enough witnesses to turn one woman's absence into a wound an entire kingdom would remember. Alpha King Ronan Thorn stood before the altar in ceremonial black, his shoulders square beneath the silver clasp of his royal mantle. Every noble house with influence in his territory had sent someone to watch him take Elara Vale as his Luna. Only Elara was missing. First, no one dared whisper. Then 10 minutes became 20. Ronan did not move. His expression remained composed even when his beta crossed the marble floor and stopped beside him with a folded message in his hand. "She's gone." 2 words spoken quietly. They still seemed to reach every corner of the hall. Ronan took the message but did not open it. Whatever explanation waited inside could not change what hundreds of people had already seen. His intended bride had left the capital before their mating ceremony. She had left him standing at the altar. A murmur spread through the court. Pity was worse than mockery. Ronan felt both hiding behind lowered eyes and carefully blank faces. He crushed the unopened message in one fist. "No one follows her," he said. His beta hesitated. "Your Majesty." "No one." Ronan turned toward the gathered court. "The crown does not collapse because one woman walks away." Then he finished the ceremony alone. 5 years later, Elara Vale stood outside those same palace gates wearing a cloak with a torn hem and boots stained from days of travel. Nothing about her resembled the woman who had once arrived at court surrounded by servants and trunks of silk gowns. Her family estate was gone. Her protection was gone. Most of what she had owned had disappeared piece by piece over 5 difficult years. What remained fit inside the worn satchel hanging against her hip. Elara tightened her fingers around its strap. Inside were a few clothes and a carefully wrapped bundle of old papers she had protected through rain, hunger, and more than one hurried departure. The guards watched her with suspicion. "Name," one demanded. For one foolish second she considered lying. Then she looked past them toward the palace rising against the gray afternoon sky. She had not crossed half the kingdom to hide now. Elara Vale. The nearest guard went still. Recognition moved across his face. Then disgust. Within minutes another guard was running toward the palace. Elara lowered her eyes. 5 years had changed nearly everything but apparently not the power of her name. The woman who had abandoned the Alpha King had returned. She was escorted through corridors she remembered too well, past servants who stopped walking when they recognized her, past nobles whose whispers followed like footsteps. At last the great doors opened. Ronan stood at the far end of the chamber, older, harder, and looking at her as though 5 years had vanished in a single breath. Elara walked forward until she reached the center of the floor. Then, before the man she had once left waiting at an altar, she sank to her knees. "I need your protection." Ronan said nothing. Elara remained on her knees, painfully aware of the silence stretching between them. She had imagined this moment during every mile of the journey back to the capital. In some versions, he ordered her thrown outside before she could finish speaking. In others, he laughed. She had never imagined that he would simply stare. 5 years had sharpened him. The young king she remembered had possessed power without needing to display it, but the man before her seemed built from restraint. His face revealed almost nothing. Almost. When his gaze met hers, she saw the old wound before it disappeared. "Protection," Ronan finally repeated. "Yes, Your Majesty." "From whom?" "Men connected to what remains of my family's estate." His mouth tightened. "And naturally, when every other door closed, you remembered mine." Elara accepted the blow without lowering her head. "I remembered that you are the king." A bitter amusement touched his expression. 5 years ago, that wasn't enough to keep you here." Her throat tightened. She could have apologized. She could have offered one of the explanations she had rehearsed during sleepless nights. None would be enough without the truth she still could not safely give him. "I am not asking you to forgive me." "No. No. Only for sanctuary." Ronan descended the steps toward her. "Your family had allies." "Not anymore. Money. Gone. Land. Most of it is no longer under my control. So the court was right." His voice remained quiet. "You came back because you have nothing." Elara forced herself not to flinch. "I came because people are being threatened, and I cannot protect them alone. Before Ronan could answer, hurried footsteps sounded behind her. A young palace servant entered carrying a tray of documents. At the sight of Alara kneeling before the king, the girl faltered. The tray tilted. Papers scattered across the polished floor. The chamberlain immediately seized her arm. Idiot! His Majesty gave orders that— It was my fault, Alara said. Everyone stopped. The chamberlain frowned. My lady. I stepped into her path when I entered. It was not entirely true. Alara had barely moved. The servant stared at her. Ronan noticed. Alara gathered the nearest papers herself before rising just enough to hand them back. She did nothing deserving punishment. The chamberlain looked toward Ronan. For a moment, Ronan's attention remained fixed on Alara with an expression she could not read. The Alara he believed had abandoned a king before his entire court should not have cared what happened to a frightened servant. Yet she had intervened without hesitation when doing so gained her nothing. Leave us, Ronan ordered. The servant fled with the chamberlain. Alara returned to her knees. Ronan walked back toward the raised dais. 7 days. She looked up. You will remain inside this palace for 7 days under royal sanctuary. No one pursuing you may touch you here. Relief hit so hard she nearly swayed. Thank you. Don't. The single word stopped her. This is not forgiveness, Alara. I know. And you will answer my questions. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. As far as I can. His eyes hardened at the qualification. 5 years ago, you disappeared without giving me the courtesy of one honest answer. Do not mistake my restraint now for permission to do it again. Alara stood slowly. She had expected hatred. What frightened her more was realizing that beneath his anger, Ronan still wanted to understand. A guard appeared at the doors. Give Lady Vale rooms in the East Guest Wing, Ronan ordered. She does not leave palace grounds without my authorization. Alara turned toward the doors. Behind her, Ronan spoke once more. 7 days, Alara. She paused. Then I decide whether the woman who left me deserves anything more. Alara understood before the first morning was over that 7 days inside Ronan's palace could feel longer than 5 years away from it. Whispers followed her everywhere. By midday they had become something more useful. 3 frightened families from former Vale lands had arrived seeking judgment. They claimed armed men had driven them from their homes while carrying orders supposedly issued under royal authority. Alara heard their names while passing the petition chamber and stopped. She knew those villages. When Ronan entered moments later with 2 officials, he found her studying one of the confiscated orders. You were told to remain in the guest wing unless summoned. I know. Then explain. Alara held out the document. This is false. One official stiffened. The royal authorization is clearly marked. The authorization may be. The Vale accounting beneath it isn't. Ronan took the page. Alara pointed toward a column of numbers. Before land could be transferred from a Vale holding, every tenant account was closed against the estate register. These entries pretend that happened, but the sequence is wrong. You can prove that? Ronan asked. If the original records still exist. Her hand moved instinctively toward her satchel. Ronan noticed. You brought records with you. Fragments. She removed several old sheets from the protected bundle. They were worn from travel but carefully preserved. For the next hour, Alara worked beside the royal officials, matching dates, tenant numbers, and transfer marks. The more they compared, the clearer the pattern became. Someone had used the remains of House Vale as camouflage. Land had been seized. Families had been displaced. Royal authority had been invoked to make resistance dangerous. And the scheme had been operating long. Enough to explain why men were now pursuing her. One elderly petitioner watched Alara across the table. We thought you'd forgotten us. The words hurt more than an accusation. I didn't. She returned to the records. Ronan watched her identify another inconsistency, then another. She remembered which villages shared grazing rights, which accounts had once been combined after poor harvests, which markings belonged to legitimate Vale administration. This was not desperation pretending to be usefulness. She knew the system because she had once helped manage it. One of Ronan's officials suddenly frowned at a date. Your Majesty. He pushed a record across the table. This transaction predates Lady Vale's disappearance. Alara froze. Ronan looked down. The entry had been made weeks before the mating ceremony. Another document showed the same pattern. Then another. Something changed in Ronan's face. If Alara had destroyed their future on a selfish impulse and fled afterward, why had someone already been moving assets through her family's accounts before she left? The chamber doors opened. Several council nobles had gathered outside, drawn by news of the investigation. Their objections came quickly. Alara was disgraced. Her testimony was compromised. Allowing her access to royal records was dangerous. Sanctuary, one argued, should end before she contaminated an investigation involving her own family. Ronan listened without interruption. Then he rose. Lady Vale remains under my protection until this investigation is concluded. Silence followed. Alara looked at him. One counselor attempted to object. Ronan's gaze stopped him. That is my ruling. The nobles bowed and withdrew, but Alara could already imagine how the story would spread through court. The Alpha King had protected the woman who abandoned him. She waited until they were alone with the officials before speaking. Why? Ronan looked at the dated transaction again. Because 5 years ago I believed I knew exactly what you had done. His eyes lifted to hers. Now I want to know what happened before you did it. By the second day, the investigation had moved into a smaller records chamber where stacks of surviving Vale documents covered nearly every table. Alara worked through them with 2 royal clerks while Ronan came and went between council meetings, always returning with another question. The first breakthrough was almost embarrassingly small. A clerk placed 2 land transfer orders beside each other. They match, he said. Alara studied the seals. No. Ronan stepped closer. You see a difference? The seal isn't the problem. The placement is. She pointed to the lower edge of the first document. My father's clerks pressed the estate seal after the witness notation was entered. Always. This one was sealed first and written around afterward. The clerk examined it again. Someone had known what a Vale document should look like. They had simply not known how House Vale actually produced one. Ronan ordered every transfer carrying the same defect separated for examination. By evening there were 17. The next morning brought a different problem. One of the displaced tenants who had agreed to answer questions arrived pale and trembling. The moment he learned powerful nobles might be connected to the seizures, he backed toward the door. I can't do this. A royal official blocked his path. You petitioned the crown. I have children. Alara rose. Let him go. Ronan, standing near the window, said nothing. The man stared at her. Alara approached slowly. Being afraid doesn't make you a coward. His expression twisted. Easy for you to say. No. She swallowed. It isn't. For a moment the room seemed to narrow around her. There are choices you make because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. Sometimes you tell yourself fear is wisdom. Sometimes you live long enough to discover the difference. Ronan's gaze sharpened. Alara did not look at him. You don't owe us bravery, she told the tenant. But if you leave, the people threatening your family remain powerful enough to threaten the next family too. The man stayed. His testimony identified the same group of estate agents appearing throughout the disputed lands. Later, Ronan found Alara reviewing the list. I can compensate you. She looked up. For your work, he clarified. You are providing knowledge my officials need. I don't want money. You told me you had none. I said I needed protection. Ronan's jaw tightened. Then what do you want? Alara pushed the witness list toward him. Protection for them. And for the other families forced from those villages. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. You return ruined. Ask sanctuary from a man you abandoned, and when he offers you money, you bargain for strangers. They aren't strangers to me. Ronan was silent. That evening, they crossed the ceremonial wing on their way to another council session. Alara slowed when she saw the familiar doors. The mating hall. 5 years disappeared. She could almost imagine the flowers again, the waiting court, Ronan standing where she had promised herself she would meet him. You haven't entered that room since you returned, he said. She looked at him. Have you? Many times. But something in his voice made her wait. Ronan looked toward the closed doors. I stopped allowing anyone to stand beside me during court ceremonies after you left. Illyra's breath caught. He continued walking before she could answer. The damage she had caused had not ended when she crossed the Capitol gates 5 years ago. She followed him in silence. Inside the council chamber, Lord Garrick Voss was waiting. He was older than she remembered, elegantly dressed, his manner polished as he questioned whether continuing to involve Illyra was prudent. She barely heard him. A silver insignia fastened his correspondence case. Illyra knew that design. She had seen it before. Her fingers tightened against the paper she carried as memory surfaced, not of the wedding itself, but of correspondence that had passed through Vale hands in the days immediately before it. Garrick noticed her staring. Their eyes met. And for the first time since returning to the palace, Illyra saw something behind another person's carefully controlled expression that looked very much like fear. Illyra said nothing about the fear she had seen in Garrick's eyes until she had evidence to justify it. By the third morning, 17 suspicious transfers had become 31. The surviving Vale records were incomplete, but the pattern inside them was not. The problem was that several pages looked meaningless even to Ronan's clerks. They aren't meaningless, Illyra said. She pulled 3 ledgers together and aligned their columns. My father's estate used a cross-register system. Land, payments, and household obligations were recorded separately. You need all 3 references before the numbers make sense. One clerk frowned. Half the corresponding pages are missing. Then we rebuild them from what remains. For hours, Illyra reconstructed sequences from tenant numbers, payment dates, and old administrative marks. Ronan joined them after midday and watched the scattered fragments slowly become a timeline. Then Illyra stopped. Here. Money had moved through several Vale-linked accounts in the weeks before their mating ceremony. Other entries showed retainers being positioned near routes leading into the capital. Ronan leaned over the table. Armed men. Retainers, Illyra said carefully. But yes. Before you left. She nodded. Another entry appeared 3 days later. Then another. By the time they finished, the conclusion was impossible to dismiss. Someone had been preparing for political disorder before Illyra ever disappeared. Ronan dismissed the clerks. The door closed. Illyra remained beside the table. How much did you know? Her stomach tightened. Ronan. How much? She looked at the records between them. This was the question she had spent 5 years avoiding. Before the ceremony, I learned that something had been arranged around our mating. His expression hardened. What? I didn't know everyone involved. I didn't know the full plan. But you knew there was a threat. Yes. The word landed heavily. Ronan stepped away from the table. And you said nothing. I believed completing the bond would put you in danger. He turned back. That is not an answer. It is the part one can give you now. His restraint cracked. You still think you get to decide that? Illyra flinched. 5 years ago, you decided what I was allowed to know. You decided what danger I was allowed to face. You decided that leaving me before my entire court was preferable to trusting me. With whatever frightened you. I thought. I know what you thought. That is becoming painfully clear. His anger was not the rage she had feared on returning. It was worse. It was the anger of someone realizing the past might have been different if he had been given a choice. Illyra forced herself to meet his eyes. I cannot give you the rest until I know who is still connected to it. Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then the council chamber doors opened without ceremony. Lord Garrick entered with 2 counselors behind him. Your Majesty, this has gone far enough. His gaze settled on Illyra. The woman admits she possessed knowledge of a threat against the crown and concealed it. She abandoned the royal mating ceremony immediately afterward. Whatever sympathy her current circumstances inspire, those facts demand arrest. Illyra felt the room tighten. Garrick continued. Lady Vale has already demonstrated that her loyalty cannot be trusted. Ronan's face became unreadable again. Garrick looked almost satisfied. Place her in custody while we investigate. No. The answer was quiet. Garrick blinked. Ronan moved to Illyra's side of the table. Lady Vale remains free under my protection. Your Majesty, she has admitted. She has also provided the only information that has allowed us to identify 31 fraudulent transfers and evidence of preparations that began before her disappearance. Garrick's mouth tightened. That hardly proves innocence. No, Ronan said. It proves I am not finished asking questions. Alara looked at him. He was still furious with her. He still had every reason not to trust her. And yet, before men who wanted her condemned, he had chosen not to surrender her. Garrick bowed stiffly and withdrew with the counselors. When the doors shut, Ronan did not look at Alara. Do not mistake that for forgiveness. I won't. Good. He gathered the reconstructed records. For now I need what you know. Need. Not tolerate. Not pity. Alara glanced toward the closed doors through which Garrick had disappeared. For 5 years, she had believed returning would only reopen the past. Instead, the past had been waiting here all along. And now the question was no longer whether Ronan would discover why she had left. It was whether the truth would destroy what little trust remained when he finally did. By the 5th day, Alara could no longer pretend that working beside Ronan felt unfamiliar. The danger was how familiar it felt. They spent hours tracing names through old Vale accounts, separating legitimate payments from those inserted by whoever had used her family's records. Somewhere between arguments over dates and quiet exchanges across crowded tables, the distance between them began to change. Ronan still did not forgive her, but he listened, and Alara had forgotten how much that mattered. Late that afternoon, he found her repairing the wrapping around her oldest papers. You guarded those carefully. I had to. Ronan noticed a faded receipt among them. What is that? Alara hesitated, then handed it over. It recorded the sale of jewelry once belonging to House Vale. Another paper documented the sale of horses. Others showed payments made across several territories. Ronan's expression changed as he followed the names. These are former Vale families. They lost homes after our lands began changing hands. You paid for them. When I could. While you were running out of money yourself. Alara looked down at her worn sleeves. They suffered because of what happened to my house. Ronan set the papers down carefully. So this is what you were doing for 5 years. Some of it. His jaw tightened. While I was here believing you had simply walked away. Alara closed her eyes briefly. There was no accusation she could make against him. She had built that belief herself. I'm sorry. Ronan went still. She had apologized before in fragments, always surrounded by explanations. This time she offered none. I hurt you, she said. Whatever I believed I was preventing doesn't change that. I left you standing there with no truth and no choice. I'm sorry. For several seconds he said nothing. Then quietly, I spent years wondering what I had missed. Alara looked at him. I could command armies, settle disputes between packs, walk into that court and have every person in it obey me. His eyes met hers. But I couldn't make sense of why the woman I trusted most had decided I wasn't worth an explanation. Her throat tightened. Ronan, I never chose another Luna. The words stopped her. He looked away first. Do not make more of that than I said. She didn't. But neither of them could pretend the admission meant nothing. For one fragile moment, the 5 years between them seemed narrow enough to cross. Then the chamber doors opened. A royal clerk entered carrying a sealed document. Your Majesty. Lord Garrick submitted this to the council. Ronan took it. Alara watched his face harden as he read. What is it? He placed the document on the table. Her own signature stared back at her. Below it was authorization for movements of Vale retainers during the days preceding the abandoned ceremony. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't authorize this. The signature is yours, the clerk said. Yes. Ronan's gaze snapped toward her. Alara forced herself to continue. The signature is mine. The authorization isn't. Outside the chamber, voices were already gathering. The council had learned about the document. And today was the 7th day. Her sanctuary had expired. Ronan looked toward the doors as the first demand for Alara's detention carried through them. If he protected her now, he would no longer be sheltering a ruined woman while investigating disputed land. He would be defending a possible traitor whose own signature appeared on evidence of a conspiracy against his crown. Alara stared at the document. 5 years ago, an entire court had believed the worst of her. Now, with Ronan finally beginning to question that judgment, someone had placed proof in his hands designed to make him believe it all over again. By sunset, the document bearing Alara's signature had reached every counselor who mattered. Garrick made certain of it. He stood before Ronan in the council chamber with the forged authorization displayed on the table between them. Your Majesty, sanctuary was granted for 7 days. Those 7 days are over. Several counselors murmured agreement. Garrick continued. If Lady Vale remains free after evidence connecting her directly to armed movements against the crown has surfaced, every allied pack will ask the same question. Are we investigating treason, or protecting the woman who once humiliated their king? Alara stood beside the wall and felt the old shame closing around her. Different day. Different accusation. Same watching faces. Ronan's expression remained controlled, but Alara understood what Garrick was doing. This was no longer only about whether she was guilty. It was about making Ronan pay politically for believing she might not be. Until the document is authenticated, no judgment will be made, Ronan said. Garrick bowed. Then I hope your Majesty is prepared for others to interpret that restraint generously. The threat was polite enough to belong in court. Its meaning was not. Powerful packs could begin questioning Ronan's judgment. Old divisions could reopen. The investigation itself could become evidence that their king placed one woman above the stability of his realm. Alara had seen this shape before. 5 years ago, she had looked at danger gathering around Ronan and reached one conclusion. Remove yourself. By nightfall, the palace had quieted. Alara sat alone in the east guest room with her satchel open on the bed. She could leave royal jurisdiction and surrender herself before Garrick's pressure divided the court further. Once she was no longer under Ronan's protection, he would have no reason to defend her. It was almost elegant. That frightened her. Because 5 years ago, her choice had felt elegant too. One person disappears. Everyone else survives. She wrapped the remaining papers and placed them inside her satchel. Then her hand stopped. Ronan's voice returned to her. You decided what I was allowed to know. Alara stared at the bundle. She had spent years calling what she had done sacrifice because sacrifice sounded nobler than fear. But leaving again would mean making the same decision for him. Again she would decide what Ronan could risk. Again she would choose his answer before giving him the question. No. The word sounded small in the empty room. Alara pulled the papers back out. Minutes later, she was walking toward Ronan's private council chamber. 2 guards tried to stop her. Tell him I have the rest. The doors opened soon afterward. Ronan stood alone beside the table where the incriminating document still lay. His gaze dropped to her satchel. Were you leaving? Alara could have lied. Yes. Something closed in his expression. But I didn't. She crossed the room and placed the protected bundle before him. These are the papers I never gave anyone. Some I carried away from the capital 5 years ago. Others I collected afterward. Ronan did not touch them. Why now? Because I was about to make the same mistake twice. His eyes lifted. Alara forced herself not to look away. I thought if I surrendered myself outside your protection, Garrick would lose the argument he's using against you. And you intended to decide that without me. Yes. The admission hurt. Then I realized that was exactly what I did 5 years ago. Silence stretched between them. I won't run again, Ronan. She pushed the bundle toward him. I will tell you everything. And I will say it before the court if I have to. His face remained unreadable. Even if the truth doesn't save you. Even if you decide what I did was treason. For the first time since returning, Alara felt no need to defend herself. I should have trusted you enough to let you choose then. I can't change that. I can only refuse to do it again. Ronan slowly untied the wrapping. He examined the first pages, then the next. Alara watched his eyes move across dates, account marks, correspondence references, and records she had protected through 5 years of exile. Then he stopped. He pulled the document bearing her signature closer and placed one of Alara's preserved records beside it. His attention fixed on the authorization sequence. The seal. The date. The signature. And something else. Ronan went completely still. Alara knew that stillness. It meant he had found the missing piece. When he finally looked at her, the anger in his face had changed. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, one hand resting on the evidence between them, "you are going to tell my court why you left me." The next morning, Alara stood before the same court that had spent 5 years calling her a coward. Ronan sat above them, the preserved Vale records spread across the council table. Garrick stood among the nobles, composed until Ronan placed the disputed authorization beside one of Alara's original records. "Tell them," Ronan said. Alara faced the room. "Before my mating ceremony, I discovered that men were moving money and armed retainers through accounts connected to House Vale." Murmurs rose. "I didn't know the entire network. I knew only that preparations had begun before Ronan and I were to complete our royal bond." Garrick stepped forward. "Convenient." Ronan silenced him with a look. Alara continued. "I learned what they intended to do after I became Luna. Evidence was being prepared to make it appear that my family had organized a conspiracy from inside the crown. Once I stood beside Ronan as queen, House Vale would no longer be merely another noble house. Any manufactured treason tied to us would become a threat inside the royal succession itself." She looked at Ronan. "The plan depended on our mating." 5 years of silence seemed to gather in the room. "I was warned that once the ceremony was completed, the accusations would be released while armed supporters moved around the capital. Pacts loyal to Ronan would be forced to decide whether their new Luna and her family had betrayed him. By the time anyone separated truth from lies, bloodshed would already have begun." Ronan's jaw tightened. "So you left?" "Yes." Her voice nearly failed, but she forced the next words out. "I believe there was one thing I could do immediately that would destroy the plan. If there was no new Luna from House Vale, there could be no succession crisis built around her family's supposed betrayal." She remembered the road leaving the capital, the certainty that had kept her moving while everything inside her begged her to turn back. "So I made sure there would be no mating." The court was utterly silent. "I let Ronan believe I had rejected him. I let all of you believe it. I thought his hatred was safer than making him vulnerable through me." Ronan rose. "And you never considered telling me." Alara turned toward him. "I considered it. But you didn't." "No. Because you decided I couldn't face the danger. Because I was afraid there wasn't time." His voice hardened. "You still decided." Alara nodded. "Yes. That mattered." She could finally see that protecting Ronan did not erase what she had taken from him. "I was right that there was a conspiracy," she said. "I was wrong to decide alone how we would survive it." Ronan looked down at the evidence. The forged authorization carrying Alara's signature used a valid signature taken from authentic Vale paperwork, but its administrative sequence contradicted the preserved records. The same defects linked it to the fraudulent transfers uncovered during the investigation. And the oldest transactions predated the wedding. Garrick's composure finally broke. "This proves nothing about me." Alara opened another record. "The accounts connect the estate agents who seized Vale lands to payments routed through holdings that benefited your network." Garrick moved toward the doors. Ronan's guards blocked him. Outside the chamber, sudden shouting erupted. One of Ronan's officials entered. "Your Majesty! Men connected to the compromised offices are attempting to seize records and leave the palace." The surviving conspiracy had moved. Ronan immediately began issuing orders. Alara scanned the reconstructed ledger. "Wait." He looked at her. "Don't follow the names individually. Follow the payment sequence. The same cross-register pattern identifies which offices were supplied together." Ronan understood. He could distrust her. He could choose the safer political path and place her under arrest while his officials handled the crisis. Instead, before the court, he handed the reconstructed ledger to his commanders. "Use Lady Vale's identifications. Secure every office she marks." Garrick stared at him. "You would stake the crown on her word?" Ronan's gaze moved to Alara. 5 years ago she had decided for him. Now he was deciding for himself. "Yes." The word carried across the chamber. Alara felt its cost. If she was wrong, Ronan would appear to have ignored evidence of treason because he still loved the woman who had humiliated him. She stepped forward. "And I will testify to everything I knew, everything I concealed, and everything I did." One counselor stared at her. You understand that your actions can still be judged? Yes. If the Crown determines that withholding this information constituted treason, I understand. She looked at Ronan. I am not asking him to protect me from the truth. The investigation moved quickly once the hidden accounting structure was understood. Compromised officials were identified through the records before they could destroy the evidence connecting them to the stolen lands and pre-wedding preparations. Garrick's network, forced into action before it was ready, exposed itself. By evening, the attempted seizure had failed. Garrick stood under guard. But when the chamber finally emptied, Ronan and Elara remained. 5 years of anger could not disappear because a conspiracy had been uncovered. Neither could 5 years of love. You saved me from something real, Ronan said. Elara's eyes burned. And hurt you doing it? Yes. She accepted the answer. Ronan stepped closer. If you had told me, I would have chosen to face it with you. I know that now. No. His voice softened. You knew it then. You were simply too afraid to trust it. That truth hurt because it was exact. Elara nodded. I won't ask you to forgive that tonight. For a moment he only looked at her. Then Ronan reached for her hand. Not as a king granting mercy. Not as a man reclaiming something that belonged to him. As an invitation. Elara looked down at their joined hands. 5 years ago, when danger came, she had run alone. This time she had stayed, told him the truth, and accepted what it might cost her. And this time Ronan had been allowed to choose. The truth did not restore everything overnight. By the following morning, Garrick remained under guard while the evidence gathered from the compromised offices was examined against Elara's preserved records. The same accounting trail that had exposed the fraudulent land transfers now connected his network to the preparations made before the mating ceremony. The court could no longer dismiss those preparations as Elara's invention. Witnesses from the stolen Vale lands confirmed the estate agents involved. Records recovered before they could be destroyed supported the payment sequence Elara had reconstructed. The authorization bearing her signature was exposed for what it was. An authentic signature attached to an order created through procedures Housevale had never used. 5 years of certainty began collapsing. The woman who had abandoned the Alpha King had not fled because she wanted another life. She had destroyed the life she wanted because she believed doing so would prevent a greater disaster. Some members of the court attempted apologies. Others simply stopped meeting her eyes. Elara discovered that neither response mattered as much as she once imagined it would. For years, she had carried their judgment as though enough suffering might eventually prove she had not been selfish. Now they knew. And she was still the woman who had made a terrible choice for a reason she believed was right. Both truths belonged to her. When Ronan found her later, she was standing near the windows overlooking the Capitol. The council has cleared you of participating in Garrick's conspiracy, he said. Elara closed her eyes briefly. She had expected relief to feel larger. Instead it felt quiet. And the families? Protected. The disputed Vale seizures remain under investigation, but no one will remove those families while the claims are reviewed. That mattered more. Thank you. Ronan came to stand beside her. There are counselors already discussing restoration. Elara looked at him. Of my status? Of what they think your status should be. 5 years ago those words might have meant everything. Now Elara shook her head. I don't want them to decide what I'm worth again. Something almost like a smile touched Ronan's face. Good. She turned toward him. What happens to us? There it was. The question beneath every other question. Ronan could have restored her title. He could have announced that the interrupted future would simply resume where it had broken. Instead, he gave her what she had denied him 5 years earlier. A choice. I don't want the woman I was supposed to mate 5 years ago, he said. Elara's heart tightened. I want the woman standing here. Now. The one who finally understands that loving someone does not mean deciding their life for them. His gaze held hers. But I will not order you to stay. And I won't pretend trust repairs itself because we uncovered the truth. Elara swallowed. So what are you asking? Whether you want to rebuild it with me. Not reclaim. Not repay. Rebuild. Elara thought of the road she had taken away from him 5 years earlier. She thought of every night afterward when she had told herself that his safety justified the silence. Then she thought of the moment she had almost run again. This time she knew what her answer meant. Yes. Ronan reached for her hand. And if danger comes again? Elara intertwined her fingers with his. I tell you. And then, we choose together. Months later, the royal ceremonial hall filled once more. The same marble floor reflected the light. The same high windows overlooked the capital. Many of the same nobles stood beneath the vaulted ceiling. And at the far end of the hall stood Ronan. This time there was no uncertainty in his face. No unopened message crushed inside his fist. No empty place beside him that the entire court pretended not to see. Elara waited at the entrance. For one heartbeat, memory pressed against her. 5 years earlier, she had stood far beyond these walls, believing the greatest proof of her love was refusing to walk toward him. She had been willing to lose her home, her name, his love, and eventually almost everything she owned. But she understood now that sacrifice without trust could become another kind of betrayal. Ronan did not summon her. He did not command her forward. He simply waited. Elara looked around at the court that had once condemned her, and later vindicated her. Neither judgment determined what she did next. She stepped forward because she wanted to. One step. Then another. She crossed the same hall she had once fled, carrying no secret that could make the choice for either of them. When she reached Ronan, he offered his hand. Elara took it. 5 years ago, she had believed loving the Alpha King meant leaving him. This time, before the same court, in the same place where their future had once broken, Elara made a different choice. She stayed.